Okay, I'd like to join you to our venture capital panel today. AR/VR as being the key component of our conference. We have some really exciting panelists from all different areas of private equity space, and some people who are working in the exciting areas of introducing new technologies and analyzing what's going to be hot in AR and VR. My name is Mariana Danilovic. I run an accelerator for AR/VR companies and AI and digital media companies here in Los Angeles. We have been focusing quite a bit the last couple years on equity crowdfunding raises as a way to speed up digital media, AI, AR, and VR companies through the space. We are trying to figure out how does every component of the private equity and public equity investment market get restructured in this new world. So Alexis McLean is going to help us a little bit with that. She's actually a research analyst in the space. So go ahead.
So we have a couple different set of data at Greenlight. So we do market research within VR and AR. We solely focus on this. So market forecasting, consumer surveying, industry surveying, all that jazz. So VR, we project the entire industry to globally to reach $75 billion by 2021. This is about middle of the pack for different projections. And AR at the same time, so 2021, to reach 21.9 billion. And this is just based on hardware, but again, global. And beyond that, 2023 to reach 36 billion. To sum up what we've seen so far regarding investment in the VR and AR space is this year it slowed down a lot. So we've looked at the first part of this year, and it's a lot behind where we were last year. So far this year, in the first half, there's been 106 deals. Last year, there was 115 in the first quarter, or the first half of 2016. But 2016 was a big bubble, not including Magic Leap. Investments reached $1 billion in 2016. 2017, for the first half, it's 383 million. So it's been a big bubble last year, a lot of hype. This year it slowed down a lot. It's been maturing, a lot more acquisitions, and a lot more Series B is what we've been seeing so far. But yeah,
that kind of gives you the space kind of layout, right?
Yeah.
And then Kinsey Cronin runs business development for StartEngine, which is one of the top equity crowdfunding platforms, and she'll tell you a little bit more about the company.
Hi, yeah. So StartEngine is an equity crowdfunding platform. So it's similar to Kickstarter and Indiegogo type of platform, but people are actually buying investment in a company rather than donating or buying rewards. And we operate under new regulations that were set forth by the Jobs Act. So it's actually the first time in about 80 years that the average person can invest in many small startup businesses. And this is really exciting in the VR AR space if you think about companies like Oculus Rift. So that was kind of a massive crowdfunding on Kickstarter that happened a few years ago. Everybody who invested in that was actually purchasing the reward of the cardboard prototype, and they raised over $2 million from the crowd, from regular people. But shortly after that, when Oculus was sold to Facebook for over $2 billion, that became kind of an issue for the community because none of these people had legally been allowed to invest, even though they recognized the value of the company and they were really excited about it, contributed to the acquisition by Facebook, the attention that Oculus got. But then the company that these people were backing kind of disappeared into Facebook, and they didn't get any kind of return on it. Meanwhile, people who had invested in the company because they were accredited and had more money, so maybe they invested tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, they got a massive, massive return on their investment. And people who put in $200, $500, $1,000, they didn't get any share in that acquisition. So with StartEngine, if you had a similar kind of raise, everybody who backed the company initially would get a little piece of that based on how much they had invested, because the value of their stock would go up. So it's a really exciting opportunity, and again, it's a very new set of laws. So there aren't that many norms around it yet, although I do work in it every day. We've raised over $40 million for companies in the last year and a half. So if you have any questions about that today, I'll be happy to answer them.
It's quite exciting, especially because people who pre-purchased Oculus VR goggles didn't even get them before the acquisition occurred. So even though you thought you were going to get some incentive with your incentive-based investment, you ended up not getting either. So it was quite an interesting story and a great reason for equity crowdfunding. So Rob Vickery is the most equity crowdfunding friendly VC I could find. No, he's been on our panels for several years now and has invested in companies that he met at Digital Hollywood. So he comes back to tell us what he thinks about the space.
Yes. So I started off before I raised my venture fund. We're on our second fund now. I managed a large major corporate investment into Digital Domain, and we financed the Tupac hologram at Coachella. So I've looked at AR, that I believe to be true AR, for a while. We've made 2 investments in the AR space, one into another hologram-based company and another kind of AR/VR consumer app. We don't do VR and AR investments really anymore. We are moved more towards SaaS enterprise software, but I love looking at the space. I love keeping an eye on it. I've been described as the Simon Cowell of virtual reality, so don't expect me to be very positive about this space right now, but please feel free to lynch me afterwards. I've seen over 169 VR startups since I raised my second fund last year, and I can't see those numbers. I can't see a $75 billion market. I see lots of headsets that are gathering dust in people's bedside cabinets, and particularly mobile VR. So yeah, I'm keen to watch the space. I'm curious to know who we're talking to here in the room. So how many of you are developers or content creators? Great. How many of you are investors? All right, cool. Great, that's good to know.
All right, so yeah. Michael, I hope that you can, Michael Otten from IBM's AR/VR lab and Watson AI lab, maybe you can shed some light on where some of this ramp up in the market is going to happen, because you see all the new things coming down the pike.
So I run a team called Watson Developer Labs. We have an initiative called AR/VR Labs. The audience here may or may not be familiar with the work my team did. We worked on, and actually I led the effort to have Watson in Star Trek Bridge Crew. And we built a product called the VR Speech Sandbox for developers to allow them to easily add a robust, configurable, interactive speech interface for a VR or augmented reality application or game, specifically from within Unity, because that was the low-hanging fruit there if we could make it really simple. And I met with Ubisoft and we talked about using voice for when you're down a buddy. If you don't know what Star Trek Bridge Crew is, it's an online co-op VR-only Star Trek experience where you are pretending to be the captain. You are the captain of your own Starfleet vessel, unless you're another role. Yeah, live long and prosper. And if you're down a buddy, you can talk to a virtual character that's not a person, and it will respond in natural language, and that's powered by Watson. And that's sort of like an example of an output of my team's mission, which is to build products for developers that solve problems they have with IBM tech in a use case-based fashion, specifically around AR/VR labs. And where do we see investment going? Yeah, I don't know. We build products. But I will say I've been surprised to hear on this panel that there's been such a quick cooling of investment, because I live in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and you hear all the time about new VR funds opening up and just shelling out money like candy. But I guess I'm maybe a few months behind the times, and that makes sense. It seems like a correct course correction. Last year was just way overhyped. I thought it was an incredibly successful year, but it had the albatross for VR specifically, but it had and even AR, but it had the albatross around it of all these ridiculous expectations. It's a completely new computing paradigm, and it takes it's ahead of schedule if you ask me.
Yes, so
Definitely.
Alexis, I think one thing that I noticed with the numbers, because you've been on this panel for a while too,
Yeah.
is that I would say maybe 2 years ago we were saying that AR was going to be 3-4 times the size of VR, and now it's like VR's twice the size or 3 times the size of AR. So what
Yeah.
happened, right?
So a big thing was, media expectations with VR. All the consumers heard that, you were going to be transported in this new place and it was going to be so cool because you were just going to go someplace else and it was going to be perfect. But reality is VR is a new tech. There's a lot of bugs to figure out. I mean, a major thing with especially content and entertainment, since this conference is focused on it, is we haven't really figured out a monetization strategy or certain standards around with it. So that's how it is with any new tech. So the hype train came, there's a lot of excitement, and then we saw some course correction as people started to realize the road that it was going to take. We don't see VR coming into mainstream until about 2020, and this is something that's going to rely a lot on processors, mobile processors, the actual display within the tech, and all these little kinks being worked out. AR we see as a larger industry down the road. It's something that can be used every day. I mean, I could be wearing smart glasses right now and seeing who everyone is in here, and that's just right now a situation where I could use it, or having my notes up. There's a lot of different use cases coming up, and there's immense opportunity beyond creating virtual worlds in AR, and it's something that will be a longer road than VR is. We see it a couple years behind. Right now we see VR AR where VR was like in 2014, 2015, where it's just the beginning of the hype train. So we see that kind of ramping up a little bit, and then expectations being met and kind of course correcting after that. But it's an exciting space, but early days.
Wow. Rob, you wanted to say something?
Yeah.
This is not the first time VR's been around.
No, definitely not.
I've seen pictures of one of my friends in the 80s trying on a headset at NASA, which looks very, very similar to the Oculus
they're
Rift.
huge.
Yeah, they were using simple polygon type, and it's different now, but the market's been through a couple of iterations, and consumers, every time it's tried to reach a level, Nintendo, the Virtual Boy, and other kind of headsets, it's kind of reached a point where the consumers are like, this is a bit weird. I remember the last time there was an issue, and I still believe the same. Hygiene is a massive problem with VR headsets. Heat, having the hardware necessary to run it. I just think every time headset-based VR has been rejected, this is now the 3rd time potentially.
Yeah.
So I'm like, when we're talking about AR as well, I'm also curious to know, are we talking about smart contact lenses and smart glasses which don't exist yet? We don't even know technically that they do exist yet. I know there's patents out there, but there's nothing out there right now. Or are we talking about mobile-based AR, which is you're holding up and I'm seeing Monopoly board like that?
Yeah. So our forecast is just on smart glass base right now. So when you're thinking Microsoft HoloLens type of a situation where it is the hardware, because for forecasting specifically, we think mobile AR is going to be huge. It's something that is immediately in the hands of millions of users. It's a powerful thing. Of course, saying that, still mobile apps have to compete on a space for a phone for, with MySpace or Google Maps or Lyft, any other mobile device. It's competing for the room on the space. But for us, we're not projecting mobile AR yet, because that's something that you have to project mobile devices in general. You're going to have to project mobile applications in general, and that's a new area for us. So we're taking time to get it right. I mean, we haven't had to correct our forecast yet, so we're feeling confident. We're usually at the lower end. We're cautiously optimistic is how we usually phrase it. We're not some of the other firms out there that are saying like $200 billion by 2021 or something like that. We're a bit
That's only
more
4 years
realistic.
away.
Yeah.
And there's only 1.45 million headsets.
Yeah.
Really, not including the mobile headset, which I don't think is a real market. But those headsets are just gathering dust.
Until 6 degrees of freedom, mobile, untethered is
Yeah.
viable.
as an AR kit and AR core, bringing that to bear. Is that what you're saying, Michael?
No, but that's interesting because I do think that that's one of the reasons that AR has such explosive potential. And the moment that, the first, killer content hits the market that people use every day, where it's like, oh, I just point my app here and this happens and I love that, it's going to take off because AR Kit, Apple put out earlier this year, and now every Apple phone from the last 2-3 years, and iPad, by the way, is able to run that, and it's got amazing plane-based tracking, way better than what Vuforia had before, which was really the only option for a little while. And Google followed suit, and I'm sure they didn't just copy Apple because they did it like 2 weeks later, and it was just as good for Android phones, only a select few, most of which aren't out yet. But the point is that pretty much every phone is going to be super AR capable, and it's basically just up to killer content to be developed that people will use every day, because the barrier to entry is so low. I lift up my phone. It's just what's going to make me want to do that in a way that's not putting me out there and embarrassing me in front of other people, but has some value to me, and that's better than looking at a map top down or something. Like I think it's interesting to do things like point your phone here one time as like a demo, but in real life, if you're standing in a place, you just open up Maps or something and tap on the icon. So we need to think about like better use cases that are way more compelling and that maybe couldn't even exist outside of AR or are AR first natively kind of thing.
I do think the barriers to entry are lower because there's 1.8 billion Android devices, and there's 500 million of these. But the barriers to entry are high because there are over 2 million apps on this app store. So getting your AR app already to be discovered makes a very expensive and very risky endeavor. The other challenge about VC funding for AR Kit and Apple and Google-based AR games is that the economic model of the App Store is that you automatically give 30% of your revenue straight away to either Google or Apple, which, as a VC, that's a difficult pill to swallow. And that automatically downsizes the amount of revenue that you can generate, and that automatically downsizes the potential revenue multiple we can get to ascertain a great valuation. So I do think ARKit is cool, but when you've got two giant incumbents controlling distribution, I don't like that. That is a bloody worry for me, and it bothers me.
Okay,
Open web standards.
So let's say Apple, let's think of it this way. Okay, so I totally understand, like, that's a snapshot of today, and I'm with you 100%. But if you look at it sort of as a bigger picture opportunity, so if Apple and Google paved the way for consumers to actually start adopting the 3D feel of, interaction with, like the Matrix-like feel of interaction with their devices, right? Because we really don't have that in us at the moment. And then there's a lot of really interesting companies coming down the pike that would then develop applications and maybe use some equity crowdfunding, which is going to be $36 billion by 2020. It's $3.6 billion today. So lots of ways for consumers to vote for these things on their own as well. So if you look at confluences of all of these things, so let's say venture capital community and private equity community is a little bit shy because we're a third or fourth time into it, but you want some proof of concept and you want people buying Oculus VR headsets or the next generation of AR VR. And we know that all of these markets are growing in the next 2 years and not in the next 10 years. What do you think may happen?
I think that a very safe thing that's going to happen that I've already seen an example of is companies are going to use augmented reality as marketing stunt. I like, actually, I think this is a best practice, the way IKEA's done it. They have an app called IKEA Places. I think I commented on it in the previous panel. In IKEA Places, you can basically place furniture around a space that you're in, and it's very, it's pixel perfect tracking, and you can walk somewhere else and get it from a different perspective. And it's a giant ad for IKEA, obviously, but also it's useful. It's useful generally, even if you're not shopping for something at IKEA, just to kind of size your space. And they know that, and they offer it for free, so nobody takes a 30% cut, including them, because it's kind of a loss leader for, hey, we want people to envision IKEA in their place. And I think that's going to be, it's already been one of the first actually useful AR things that I've seen, and I think other companies are probably going to see that and maybe follow suit. And it maybe doesn't have to be as much about, I need X million downloads and this much revenue to account for the 30%, et cetera. But also, that's probably not an investment target, so.
Yeah, it's also
maybe
interesting.
You're right to wait.
Well, if the enterprise adopts it, whether it's a point of purchase marketing or any part of the enterprise space, then it's fundable. with the traditional sort of SaaS models, right, or basic enterprise models the venture capital likes to fund because they're somewhat more predictable. But if you think of it, I read so many pieces on this after the AirKit and AirCore came out, that really, if you look at all the things that are going on with AI and all the things that are going on with AR right now and VR, you really are looking at creation of the new operating system for
definitely.
connectivity. So now that's a whole nother venture fundable and consumer fundable space. So what are we seeing there, Alexis?
So from the consumer space, we've done this consumer survey. I think it's our third year, fourth round of putting it out there. We've seen it start in VR to skew towards gaming at the beginning, but now we're seeing, like last year, travel and tourism was the largest. This year it was home design, and tourism took second. Gaming was like about the middle of the pack.
For VR, home
For
design?
VR.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, this was about the time, right after the survey, we started seeing like Lowe's and Home Depot having you come into a retail spot and doing a demo of like, okay, here's a room. I'm going to put this sink over here, and maybe I'm going to paint this wall this color, and maybe put this window treatment there. It was something where they could visually see how they wanted to see their space.
That makes sense.
And this is something that we've also realized there's a lot of confusion within the consumer space. So part of the survey that we ask is unaided responses for them to list VR devices. What VR device have you heard of or tried? And there was some confusion there, especially with Microsoft. Microsoft is coming out with VR headsets. They had the HoloLens out, so they were listing Microsoft HoloLens as a VR headset. So that's something that we've seen. There's a lot of confusion within the space, but as consumers have started to experience more in the space, they've had a better envision beyond just gaming that they've seen so far for how they can use VR and even AR. We asked a question earlier this year, so this was before ARKit, but about a little bit over 6 months before Pokemon Go came out. We asked them what types of things they would want to do in AR if they're interested. Only 15% said they weren't interested. And we explained AR as a overlaying 3D or digital information on top of the real world, whether it was mobile or a smart glass device. But the largest was gaming, but we're with about, 50%, 58%. And with live events at 39%, but we're expecting to see this rise as, even Apple, when they were coming out with ARKit, they were showing some demos with MLB where you could use your phone to see player stats as you're watching the game. How long are you going to keep this up? Not the entire time of the game, but it's another use case where you see that kind of information. So we're expecting to see more everyday use cases beyond gaming and entertainment become popular as they're getting ARKit and AR games and ARCore as well into their hands.
So when you look at and that's awesome, and it's going in that direction of the operating system clearly. Mm-hmm. So Kinsey, what are you seeing that consumers have done with the companies that were funded on Start Engine that would help grow the company more than just investment?
It's a huge it's a huge change in the relationship between the customer and the company. The use case. So if you buy something, you're thinking, how much can I get for as little as possible, right? Like, can I get a deal? Can I get a sale? How can I get what I want without having to spend that much of what I have? When you invest in something, there's kind of that like gambler's flip, right? Now you're thinking, how much can I risk to spend to participate in this? And we really see a huge level of support and a change in the entire mindset of the investors. They no longer think of themselves as somebody that needs to be pleased. They still do. They still think that, like any the customer relationship is still there. But they're far more likely to be forgiving, be excited, post and share about updates. We see a lot of comments where if a company has an update that says, we didn't meet the expectations that we said we did. You get a lot of replies that are like, we totally understand that. We just want to make sure that you can do this and that. There's a lot of support, because regardless of whether or not the company does well, you're already invested in it. So you can't just say, oh, you know what, I don't like this brand anymore. I don't like McDonald's, I'm going to switch to Burger King. You're in McDonald's. That's where your money is. So you want it to do well. So I think there's a really good opportunity, and we've seen really amazing kind of investor clubs be created by these companies. They create a whole sense of community and personality around their investors, and send out monthly newsletters and updates, and people just get really excited. I mean, these are consumer investors. They're regular people. It may have been a small investment. They're just kind of excited to be part of it, which is really
Can
cool.
I ask a question? I'm curious if you guys dabble in ICOs, ICOs, initial coin offerings.
We do.
You do?
Yes,
Okay.
we do.
Interesting. I don't know
we
if everybody
actually-
knows what that is, but
Yes.
it's like
Go ahead and explain it.
using cryptocurrency, the concept of cryptocurrency is sort of like a pseudo, this is how I understand it anyway, you can explain it better than me actually, but as a kind of like a stock almost for a company, right?
Sure. The most important part of the ICO is the idea of a token. So currently, a lot of companies are raising money for their tokens, because there's this excitement around the growth of Bitcoin and Ethereum. So people who bought those tokens at a very low price they have millions in cryptocurrency, which is not extremely easy to convert into regular currency, but can be used to buy a Lamborghini and other things, and also you can get your money out.
Great investments like a Lambo.
Yeah. Well, that's just a cool thing that you can buy with that. But the idea is that there's a token, so we can do it two ways. It is really important if you do an ICO to register in the U.S. If you don't, you risk jail time. Yeah, if you want to be a free citizen here, or most places, you really need to register your security. In the last couple of years, there have been a lot of ICOs that were unregistered, and therefore in violation of securities laws. And it will probably see people in the next few years being on trial for things that happened a few years ago. There's not always a precedent. That doesn't mean that you're not breaking the law. So it's a really
That's depressing.
Yeah. But yeah, we are involved in that. And so if you buy a token, you can either buy a utility token. So if you imagine buying like Monopoly money, that's usable. If the token if there's an unlimited amount of those tokens that can be sold, then it's not a security, because it's not going to go up and down in value.
Yeah.
Because there's not going to be a market for it, because you'll always sell it. However, if you limit the amount, and then people are buying them with the expectation that there'll be more demand and the value of each dollar will go up, then it is a security. So what we do is we allow you to either sell your security as a token. So it's the same way that you would design any kind of maybe angel terms. So maybe it's a piece of a convertible note, or it's just straight equity, and you just put a token on it that represents the security. Or you can have a double layer where you have a security that allows you to purchase tokens that are utility tokens later. Yeah, it's a little complicated, sorry.
But it's interesting. Okay, so the reason why this was so interesting is that if you look at the whole setup with Bitcoin and Ether, if you look at the actual intent was to replace the monetary currencies of countries which are tied to maybe interesting or not so interesting, actual holdings of the country that may or may not be supported in the future. So kind of replacing that volatility in the currency markets.
And also
However,
the middlemen, right?
yeah,
Cutting out the middlemen of the banks
and the country and the banks and the whole infrastructure, right? And so you can see how the specific countries are not that excited about that, right? Because it is a source of their control and their ownership and their revenue, and so that you're attacking all of that, right? And the current infrastructure. However, ICOs will be, some of them have been regulated by the SEC, or SEC is considering regulating all of it.
The SEC made a statement in July, which kind of put a halt to a lot of people who are preparing to do them in an unregistered manner, and then you've started to see a lot of scrambling to figure out how to register them. And there have been just a handful of registered ICOs, but we're having a summit in November in Santa Monica. Anyone's welcome to come. That is going to be bringing together a lot of people. There's a huge community now looking for a solution there. What I think is really interesting is if you think about a company like, or a game like Pokemon Go, if you imagine that there are, I actually am not super familiar with playing the game, but if you could buy, things with tokens, that you could actually use money and buy tokens, and then you could get new Pokemon or have special access or tips or whatever.
That is what you do.
Oh,
Yeah,
cool. Okay. So you
and
can
that's
buy
another
that
great
with
Man
money.
up to admit.
Just like the
Play
Lamborghini.
Pokemon Go.
Yeah.
So if you can buy that with money, but there's only a limited amount of tokens that are available for purchase, and you have to buy them from other people. Now what you have is a security. So instead of buying them directly from Pokemon Go, you're buying them from, Alexis early on bought a ton of them when they only cost $1. Now that there's no more, she can charge me $5. Now she's making money from her Pokemon Go. So
Okay.
that's where an ICO kind of fits
Totally
into
makes sense,
any kind of gaming space.
I have to admit, like, Pikachu as a security scares the shit
Yeah, register your Pokemon Go
I
with
used
the
to-
SEC.
yeah, absolutely scares the shit out of me. No, look, I mean, I think there's been a lot of, we did a panel recently at the Crowd Invest Summit with 3 of my other VC friends, and I think a few people in the
You
room were...
moonlight as an equity investor, I think.
Yeah, totally.
Crowdfunding.
I love Bulbasaur stock. It's the best stock you can get. So there's a few people in the room were trying to get like this like battle between VC and ICOs and crowdfunding, and there's no need for that. There's 2 very different needs for these types of pockets of cash, right? VC, while very hard to get, and you give away 20% of your company in your seed round typically,
And preferred stock.
absolutely a preferred stock. Yeah, I don't want common stock. No, but that is
Unwashed common stock.
absolutely. Yeah, it's for the dotards. What it does, what VC does do is that you get the advantage of having a fund with more money to invest in your Series A and your Series B and your Series C. You have the advantage that the investors we have and the general partners we have connections that a dentist in Idaho who's invested in your ICO may not have.
Unless all of your customers are dentists.
Right.
So there is a reason as to why you choose one or the other. I think VR is actually moving into a category that is suitable for you guys, because we want we want like massive growth potential. And
You
right
want
now,
proof of concept.
well, not really. No, I invest in minimum viable products, but
Yeah.
I mean, I want kind of scalability, and right now with a very small market, it's not scalable. However,
Okay.
before we go into you going out and raising an ICO, there is another thing that I tell everyone, because I used to be an angel investor, and there's something that changed in the tax code in December 15th of 2015. There is a new act called the PATH Act, which stands for Protecting Americans Against Tax Hikes. Now, if you are an entrepreneur and you are raising money for your company, you have to write this shit down. Section 1202. Now, what it means is that you, as a founder, can offer angels the chance to invest in your company federally, tax-free, up to $10 million or up to 10 times your original investment, whichever is greater. This basically was enacted by the government to try and encourage investment into startups. Now, no one knows about this. We have some investors who've got these business manager guys, and they were like, "Oh, you're lying." I'm like, "No, we're not. We sent them the code, and it's absolutely true." So if you are raising capital and you're trying to raise it from angels, which actually have a lot of values that VCs share, often they're high net worth individuals with a Rolodex, right? They're also sometimes slightly easier to raise from, maybe. But you can go out and tell them that they can essentially invest in your company tax-free. California will still take their stake, and they always will, and I'm totally okay with that. But federally, Trump will not have your money.
Sounds good.
So remember that, because I really want you to go out and use that to sell to people, because you will get
Well,
investment without having
yeah.
to go this way or have to go this way or any other way.
And
So-
Kinsey, I think with equity crowdfunding, it goes both ways. Like if you have some really good angels in the deal already, it's easier to raise equity crowdfunding than if it's just the pure startups. Although I've seen a few of them, get through and do well with equity crowdfunding, Legion M being one of them, right, without any products or revenue.
But they kind of were their own angels.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
Oh,
no,
I see what you're saying. Okay, so
Yeah.
they did have angels come in into the equity round.
Yes. So they started strong. It definitely works very well together. You can have simultaneous raises privately. You can be continuing on your pitch grind and while you're running your campaign.
So side by side means that for the regulation crowdfunding, right?
Yeah, so you don't have to, just because you're doing something under Regulation Crowdfunding or Regulation A+, doesn't mean that all of your funds need to go through that way. It doesn't affect the way that you're raising outside of that. And a lot of angels really like having another way to get funds in, and it's a marketing strategy. We always say it also helps companies fail faster.
Right.
If the community that you think is going to buy your product once you have all your investment money to then build it doesn't actually respond, then maybe they don't like it as much as you think they're going to like it, and maybe it's not worth more angel investment coming in.
Yeah.
So it's great. It's still such early days that we don't really know what will happen 5 years later. We have no idea about that yet.
Yeah, this is confirmed. I think there was a report in Europe about the last 6 years of equity crowdfunding, and if the companies were successful with their raise, 80% of those companies are still alive 6 years later. This is not a typical venture capital model. I've been in the incubator space, VC space, that, you're lucky if it's like 1 out of 10 that does well, and maybe sometimes you have some ones and twos, but not a lot of them in a portfolio. Where here, you're getting I think it's probably because you're getting the support of the consumer base that's actually buying the product.
You're getting the support of the consumer base, and you're also going through instead of just convincing a room full of people who may be kind of unrelated to your demo that you're going to be selling your product to, and convincing a group of people in Silicon Valley that it's a great idea, it's the next big thing, you actually go out and see if you can convince everyone else. So earlier, you mentioned that there's been several rejections of VR, but Oculus Rift was one of the things that brought it back. So
Yeah, but now it's died again.
But it brought it back. So now let's say another little company comes out and does another campaign. You don't have to decide that you change your mind about VR. The community, the whole country of people who are interested can change your mind for you because they can bring it back.
And prove the concept, and
Yeah.
it really takes some risk out of investing. That's what I'm seeing. That writing that check is really, really hard when you're sitting there with your knowledge, which is great, and you talk to all the right people in the industry, and you talk to suppliers and vendors and other companies, other founders, and you form an opinion, right? And we have some really smart people on this panel. We were all of the opinion that AR was going to be 3 times the size of VR 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And we were all like, yeah, this makes sense to us.
But
right?
how do you even calculate that? 3 times the size, right? I mean,
Yeah, it was like a 120 billion projection. It was 30 for
Revenue?
For VR by 2020 or 2025.
okay, in terms of revenue.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
always
Revenue,
beyond
yeah.
2020, and it was always revenue, it was always global.
2020.
For us, we were always very cautious from the beginning because nothing has ever grown that fast. Like you look at, even television, nothing has just been like, oh yeah, everyone's on board immediately. It's going to be a hugely profitable business. I mean, VR and AR for the next couple of years, it's going to be a struggle because you're trying to prove to consumers that it's worth it. And right now it's just, it's phenomenal. I definitely suggest if, you see some great demos out there and some really great emotional connections with content, and it's a great opportunity what you're not getting from television or the internet or your mobile device. There's some sort of experience, and that's super beneficial, but the quality isn't necessarily 100% there yet. And there's just some things that need to happen, like 5G will be a huge help advancement of processors. There's a ton of little things that, would definitely help. But I mean, we've even seen the last couple of years, like cell phones have kind of been stagnant. Like I think consumers are ready for the next big thing. They're not ready for, okay, like here's an iPhone, but guess what? It has a bigger screen and it's a better camera. It's going to read your face, $1,000,
But I would argue that conversational interfaces have actually slotted in to that next major revolution spot ahead of AR, VR, which I consider ultimately one platform. I know this is a red herring. They have different use cases now, but that's determined by the form factor. And once we have 6 degrees of freedom, high fidelity VR that has pass-through cameras, you could be doing what you just said, having glasses on and looking at everybody here, and there's metadata in front of them, and then you hit a button and it's full screen and it's Minecraft. And so I think eventually those will merge, and maybe it won't be in glasses, but certainly a lot of phones do AR and VR. This phone can do Google Daydream and Gear VR, et cetera. What was my point? My point was, it was not about the merging of AR and VR.
Yeah.
It was,
interfaces, platforms.
You talked about the speech, being as the next.
Oh yeah,
the
yeah.
bots,
So I mean, Alexa, right? Alexa everywhere. Siri,
assistants,
HomePod, what Google's doing with Google Home. I mean, it just seems like it's everywhere. It's crazy.
Yeah.
There's alarm clocks with screens on them and a camera that you can talk to. I have my home automated. I think that conversational interfaces are making the phone kind of invisible. We can operate our phone by talking to something else, and something will happen on our phone, or talking to our phone and something will happen somewhere else. But it's, I think that's maybe retarded, delayed the advancement or the adoption of AR, VR as a serious non-gaming but like next computing paradigm platform.
So
What do you
AI
think about
kind
that?
of surpassed it, and I'm glad
AI?
that you're bringing that up because that's kind of like one of the lead things developing in AI. So you looked at AI, Rob, extensively last year, and you live in it, Michael. So what do you think is going to lead the way other than that? Clearly the chatbots are like number one in AI, but what else is happening with AI that will sort of revolutionize the space?
Well, I think it depends upon which area you're looking at. If you're looking at it from a SaaS enterprise software level, we're seeing like neural nets being able to enhance satellite data, imagery data that we're looking at. We're looking at investing in a company that's doing just that. We're interested in seeing how AI is applied to drones and towards autonomous vehicles so that it makes decisions for you. We're seeing deep learning. I mean, machine learning is now one of the most overused terms. It's almost as bad as AI. Deep learning.
It's a subset.
And proper machine learning, whereby it's not a smart spreadsheet or an Excel spreadsheet. This is actual neural net-based computers making decisions for you on their own, is what I'm interested in. So yeah, it's definitely moving ahead. We've invested in a bunch of machine learning and deep learning companies, and we're continuing to do so.
I actually give a talk called AI in VR.
Okay.
A few of the different areas we touch on. I touch on like current trends and potential future trends. We get approached a lot to talk about conversational interfaces, as you might imagine, but also there's some misguided interest from the gaming industry around replacing NPCs with AI, and NPCs being non-player characters, because the gaming industry has long used the term AI, artificial intelligence, to refer to non-player characters in games, but it has nothing to do with machine learning, with deep learning, and so they're thinking, oh, what if we just hot swap this? And right now the answer is, you're kind of thinking of it in the wrong way. So imagine if you're playing Street Fighter 2 and Chun-Li just keeps kicking into the corner because some algorithm had some emergent behavior that was powered by an AI solution, and it was just kind of weird and it broke the gameplay experience. There's a reason that artificial intelligence in games, it adheres to a very strict and rigid, most of the time, rule set that doesn't break, because they're designed to give the illusion of being alive or being a character inhabiting this world without actually doing things that would off-put a player, right? So you need your NPCs to shoot at you if they're enemies so that they can give you a challenge. You can't have them wanting to go eat a sandwich, right? And so, so we get a lot of questions about that, but I do think that us and others are looking into how we will serve that market, because if we're just going to keep being us, that's a business opportunity. But also, I think spatial programming, sort of an evolution of visual programming that leverages our spatial memory along the lines of what happens with like a memory palace, and then also some advertisers or folks building AR, VR experiences want to do visual recognition, and I also think that's a bit wrong-headed, because if you think about it, we're sitting in this room right now, and there's no computer, unless we're living in a simulation, who knows, that will know computationally the distance between me and that guy's glasses, for example. But in VR, if this were all rendered in VR, you would automatically, natively have access to every single bit of information you could ever need about what's in this scene in this room. And so you don't really need visual recognition taking an image of one of your eyes, a flat image, and then sending it to a server somewhere so that a computer vision algorithm can kind of parse the meaning of that. It already knows. It already knows more than a picture could ever tell you. So those are some of the areas of interest that we see now. I think in the future that will change. Most of that will change. Maybe not the conversational interface piece, but yeah, that's kind of.
And this is interesting. It's a new coordinate system, really,
Yeah.
to think about if you're developing in the space.
Definitely.
Yeah, and one of the most important hires for most startups these days are data scientists. Now, data scientists are extremely expensive. We just invested in a company that automates a level of data science for companies that can't afford data scientists. But on average now, they are the biggest cost center in any employment bill. So I would encourage you, if you're building an AI company, that you should start from the ground up with a data scientist as your co-founder. It's extremely important, and it's really helpful when you're raising funds.
And yet it's a typical, place in the marketplace where here are these wonderful, amazing human beings who are creating the future, data scientists, but they're not really kind of living in the present.
Well, they're not creating the future, they're analyzing the
Right,
data.
they're analyzing the future,
They're
right.
finding trends and objects and answers within massively complex levels of data. I mean, I
They
was
have to marry it with some marketing, right? Which I'm finding very challenging with my AI companies, is to have them understand the role of marketing and kind of adopting this to real life environments. And I'm sure that there'll be some amazing things happening very shortly where AI companies make that connection. But if you go to the AI conferences, it's kind of the same people talking about analysis, right? And when is there going to be actual reality is what I'm asking.
So actually, I just had a question about, because I think what's really interesting is we keep talking about data and we're talking about the trends, and it seems like it's trends based on current adults, right? And I'm really curious if you have any data about Generation Z or whatever they're calling all of the next people that are coming up, because I see, just anecdotally in my life, I see some seriously significant changes in how they communicate, how they relate to their electronics, and that seems to be a huge opportunity for this particular space, because I think getting me to download and then continually use some kind of an AR thing on my phone and want to hold my phone up before I look with my eyes at something is going to be a lot harder potentially than a 14-year-old.
Yeah, definitely. We did a survey in 2015 about VR when, right before the big hype of 2016, we were asking, kids, and I didn't prepare any of the data on it, but what we saw was a excitement around VR, especially gaming and entertainment, but also as a new way to learn, as being able to be in a new environment. And I mean, how cool would it be if you're learning about dinosaurs and take a VR field trip to the prehistoric age?
And learning
That's
your
really cool.
preferred way. Right?
Yeah,
At
exactly.
your speed as well.
Yeah, you can interact with it. It's not just reading a textbook. It comes to life, which is a huge, great opportunity. And, there's immense possibility out there with education. But, unfortunately, I don't have the data that I can share with you guys ready available. But it was something that was very interesting. But it was also something that we took into account, too, of, these are kids we're surveying. So is this... what kind of influence is onto them, whether it's, their friends or their parents, because that's something that is a factor as well.
Okay, so in my talk, AI in VR, I actually give some future predictions about some things, and one of them is metaverse native progeny, which I think should be the name of the next generation.
what?
But I think they're going to
Can
call
you
them
say that
Z.
again? I want to
Metaverse native progeny.
Wow.
Is it
Or
metaverse
scions?
like
I don't know.
universe?
Yeah, it's
Oh,
just
it's
like
not
a
metaverse.
pseudo term
Sounds
for
like a movie.
virtual world. But the point is that, I think kids, and I really do believe this along the lines of what you're saying, the technological divide between baby boomers and millennials is going to be nothing compared to millennials to metaverse native progeny, Generation Z, whatever. Because they're going to grow up in a world where real means something different than it does to us. To us, real means something physical in the physical world, but kids are going to grow up with shared illusions. They're going to play with that fuzzy purple teddy bear that's going to teach them things and is going to be their friend, and their friends are going to see it. It will have real world impact on their world. Maybe they get points that they can spend on toys or whatever, but they might say, look, this is a real living thing. Just because it doesn't have a physical body and you can't understand that, millennial mom and dad, doesn't mean that it's not real. And I think that that's going to be an interesting thing to tackle. I really do.
I think it's so exciting.
What?
We had that in the first reiteration of virtual reality. It was called Teddy Ruxpin.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go.
It's a very creepy bear. I had one of those. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
But the millennials didn't have it, so you're gonna have to go to grandpa,
Sorry,
baby
I don't
boomer,
know.
and then they'll
Yeah.
get you.
Yeah.
But is it real?
Well,
Uh-huh.
that's the problem. I'm the host of Christmas Past.
Okay.
My name is Francis Hammond. I wrote a best-selling book about virtual reality that was published in 1993.
Cool.
There you go.
Awesome.
I can tell you what killed virtual reality the first time around. It was lying. A lot of lying.
Lying?
Lying.
Ah.
A lot of lying.
You mean like Magic Leap? No, I'm kidding.
No.
I'm just kidding. Sorry.
Excessive hype about what it was going to do. Everybody wanted the holodeck.
So you do mean Magic
And
Leap.
then Timothy Leary managed to kill the whole thing for 20 years by comparing it to a psychedelic experience. So everybody like you got scared and ran away and didn't invest.
Should we open up some questions? 'Cause we've only got 10 minutes left.
Yes,
Yeah.
let's ask, okay, Michael, since he has some stock in Magic Leap,
Yeah.
maybe you want to set this straight.
What? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
In your metrics, are you looking at kind of the industrial uses of AR, like the helmet-based?
Oh, yeah.
Because, I mean, obviously nobody wants to run around wearing a helmet, but if you already wear a helmet, if you're riding a motorcycle or you're in construction or something like that, how do you see those kind of markets?
Yeah, so when I was giving our number, I guess I should have for AR clarified too that this is something that we see most of potential in enterprise applications. We see consumer, both content and hardware being a small percentage. We see this massive opportunity for AR in enterprise. So I think, let me see, I wrote it down somewhere. So we saw consumer content only accounting for 19% of total revenue in 2023. We see this as something that can completely revolutionize the workplace where, hey, if you are unsure about doing something, you can bring something up. It also has safety components like the DAQRI helmet. There's just immediate ROI for enterprise and industrial applications, which is being used now. AR is largely an enterprise technology with everyone from Walmart to CAT to a ton of different applications, largely automotive with VR design. And AR technology involved in there as well. There's VR and AR is a huge opportunity for enterprise because it's a very clear ROI. You can have this benefit immediately and go, and that's how it's been. What we've seen, I wasn't involved in, that previous round of VR, but that was something that was a big component of it with the domes and the VR walls, and so it's still a large part of the industry.
We believe the same, and that's why IBM is investing heavily in the space, because we think that most of the future use cases are going to be around productivity, education, therapy, and recovery, with entertainment and gaming experiences being more in the marketing realm, et cetera. And so far, I think it's going to take a while, but there's been a lot of interest in and development of various prototypes, almost experiments, about how people might do things like do embodied collaboration if they want to do, instead of a video call, you're in London, I'm in New York, and we're inhabiting the same room and looking at the same shared illusion. That to us is real. Maybe it's data we're manipulating. So yeah, we also see a big opportunity in enterprise for both VR and AR. And if you even think about the use cases and what I was saying earlier about them eventually merging, Walmart they're doing a 360 video to help train employees on how to notice abnormalities in the workplace. And then your point about the auto industry, yeah, lots of VR work, and I think this is interesting. lots of training simulations around dangerous jobs are taking place and moving into VR. Like, you don't actually want to expose that jet engine to some scrub that just got a job while they're learning to fix it. And, you know, that $1 million jet engine, or probably a lot more than that even. But in VR, that doesn't matter as much. And then also, like you said, deployed workforces in the field. If they need to fix things, either what they're wearing or on their phone, they can get instructions. So yeah, they're kind of already dovetailing.
So I had a question for you, Rob. You seem to no longer believe all that much in VR. There's no killer app in VR for consumer adoption.
No.
So how?
Hold on, let's just let this gentleman. Yeah.
So how does somebody who's a content creator find financing to create the content that's going to drive the hardware sale?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to address this. I have another panel, 12:30, and we're going to have content discussion as to how do you fund content. It's an alternative funding panel, so we'll talk about equity crowdfunding, funds that are investing in content, et cetera. So
Yeah,
we
yeah.
will address that as well, and he's going to address it now because he doesn't like to invest in content.
Well,
It's
we
not
can't. I
the-
mean, VC funds
not the
can't.
right
VC
thing.
funds can't invest in content because it isn't scalable. It's a slate, right? It's a film slate, and it's difficult to be able to build long-term sustainable, differentiation with a content slate.
He has,
Strong content.
limited. He's limited to have a certain
Got some
requirement.
tech.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has to be tech. Go ahead.
Just a provocative investment question.
Yeah.
What about the relationship between crowdfunding and VC investment?
Okay.
It seems like there's a negative selection bias that if you're a good candidate for VC, you raise VC. And so sometimes what ends up on equity crowdfunding, at least right now, there may be enough negative signaling there it makes it harder to raise a follow-on round. I'm sure if you two
Yeah.
check it out.
Yeah, I mean, you can go first. Go
Yeah.
ahead. Jet ladies first.
I've heard this argument
Only
at the
the
beginning.
Yeah,
Totally.
it's the other way around. People who can't crowdfund will go to VCs. No, obviously that's not
fired.
true. Obviously that is not true. There's definitely a separation right now. VCs tend to be significantly more risk-averse, data-driven, you can speak for yourself, but we find that we do get a lot of quirkier companies. They're different, but we also get companies that would have absolutely no problem getting VC funding that turn it down, but because they have such a strong online community already, or such a strong set of people backing them, they would prefer to completely avoid giving up 20% of their company on terms that they're not as comfortable with, and they'd rather go directly out to their consumers, who are the people they're trying to please anyway, keep pleasing them, and then also have terms that are way more favorable for themselves. And even if you give 20% of the company away, you're not giving a board seat, you're not giving up any kind of voting rights, so it helps a company maintain control. And that does tend to be more appealing to people who have personality types that don't really like to get along with VCs. So that's why I say
Wow,
quirky.
you just made it. Wow, that's a whole bunch of generalizations.
No,
listen.
Well, what?
Look, I mean,
am I
okay.
supposed to give one specific
Well,
example of one anecdote? I have to
let me,
generalize.
let me just say, Cloud Imperium Games. Had Cloud Imperium Games had raised venture capital money, $150 million would not have been incinerated. He has no board, he has no ability to be able to have any checks and balances. The reason why people raise money from venture capitalists, and while it is maybe 20% of what you're giving away, people are too focused on the size of the slice. Focus on the size of the pie that you're making. 20% of a $1 billion company is pretty damn attractive to me, and also it's pretty damn attractive to you. If you're giving away 20% of a $100 million company, which is what the ultimate value of maybe a crowdfunded company might be, that's a lot. So what we're trying to say here is that we do a lot of due diligence on our companies. We insist on a board seat because we think when a 23-year-old perhaps has come up with an idea that he needs a little bit of grey hair on the board to make sure this is guided. Now, so I entirely agree that we will never fund a electric skateboard, or we'll never fund a NASA helmet recreation. We won't do that. We will fund scalable businesses that will hit key milestones in revenue and in product roadmap.
Would you follow something that was crowdfunded?
No.
But I will bring back the statistics that Mariana did mention earlier about European crowdfunding companies, which are more likely to still exist later on. So if you want your company to still exist, but maybe be smaller, and also if you want to stay the CEO for sure and not give anybody the ability to unseat you, because even if you're 23,
We don't
you may
unseat
want to keep your
CEOs. We
Some
don't.
people-
We
the-
don't want to unseat CEOs.
Steve Jobs got unseated.
So
I
everybody
was
knows
hoping
that.
for this
You
conversation to
can.
happen.
The idea is that you can unseat them. You can. So if you want nobody to be able to unseat you, and maybe as I mean, it's very early. I don't have the data to tell you that. For
I
American
do
company-
actually. So 3.6 billion today deployed with equity crowdfunding, and according to the World Bank, so not just another research firm, but like World Bank, there will be $36 billion deployed by 2020, which is the number we're throwing around all day today. So it's tenfold what it is today. At 2020, the projection for the venture capital market's $30 billion, and for angel capital, $20 billion. So everybody will have to get along and figure out how to do this. Kinsey actually has now ability to trade your stock, because these are basically public stock. If the regulation crowdfunding and regulation A+ companies that you invested in, you can now use their site to trade the stocks. So now there's a full circle market available. However, venture capital is very important. Angel capital is very important. All capital is important, right? That's how we create ventures. But I think there's going to be some sort of development of relationships as we go on in the next 2 years.
And just 2 points, because I can't let these slide. We invest in the founder. At a seed stage company, the product is so early and the traction is so little that we're investing in the person. We don't want to unseat that guy. Unseating that guy basically invalidates our entire investment thesis as to why I gave him my child's trust fund to grow his business. I do not want to unseat any founders. The other thing is, the reason why I regard as crowdfunding as being a negative signal for raising Series A capital is that to raise Series C capital, you have to go through a lot of scrutiny from people like myself who have done this for a long time and lost a lot of money or made a lot of money by doing so. We've got a lot of warts and experience from doing this. I like people that have been able to raise capital from professional institutional funds, because it shows that they've been able to withstand due diligence and tough questioning. I'm not so keen on companies that have been able to go out there onto crowdfunding and raise from the general consumer. Doesn't really necessarily have as much experience in doing the investments that we've done.
Okay,
But
but
it's like a Kickstarter for product rather than equity?
Totally.
I have a way to tie these two together, and I'm curious about. Oh, you gotta go.
I just wanted to say one other thing though, because I apologize. I was not trying to suggest that you personally would unseat a CEO. I'm just saying that it's probably in the terms. But that doesn't mean you want to do it. That doesn't mean you want to do it. The other thing is that how do you explain the gap? I just want you to talk just for a minute about the gap, the fact that under 5% of people that get venture capital are women, and under 3% are minorities.
Well, that's
because
not-
that's a problem.
That is
Because
a
it's
problem.
not just like, oh, you're better, you get all the money.
All right.
Oh, these guys, look
Let
at
me
these
answer
white
this
guys.
one.
They're born in Silicon Valley. They were able to get institutional funding. They must be smarter and better.
33% of my founders are women. I've got 4 veteran founders on my portfolio, and I have African American, I have Indian, I have Hispanic, I have white, and I have European founders.
See, this is why I brought Rob here, because he's like the friendly VC.
I'm just telling you, no, I don't want stereotypes to be continually peddled, right?
But
Because
if
it doesn't
But
help.
if the facts are there, I'm not saying that you're the guy. Obviously, you're here. You're not the guy. The system. Those are the numbers for this system. So there needs to be another solution, because not all the VCs are like you. They're not all saying, I want at least 33% of what is really 50% of the population to have my money, right? So you are doing a really good job. 33% is super high.
I'm not
the
choosing
rest
people
of the
based upon their
community isn't
gender or
doing
their
it.
ethnicity. I'm choosing them
You
based
do
upon their ability
meritocracy.
to hustle and to build
Yeah.
a business.
I think what we can agree on is that as time goes on and all of these opportunities are available for founders, that there will be more meritocracy in the way that ventures get built. And that's really the point,
Yeah.
right? Meritocracy kind of rules,
For
right?
those of you who are women funders, we have the Women Founders Network. I'm the judge on that next week. If you have an idea, come to that. Join it. It's a non-profit based here in Los Angeles. Do it.
Thank you very much, panelists. Awesome today. Really fun stuff. And thank you for participating.
All right.